Picture this. You're alone in the dead of night. The only light for miles is a flickering gas station sign, and the few customers you get aren't from around here, or even from this world. I took a night shift job in rural Nevada and quickly discovered the rules weren't just for my protection, but for my survival. Breaking even one means a fate worse than termination. I didn't take the job at the Midway fuel stop because I had a passion for petroleum or a love for the starry Nevada sky. I took it because my bank account was hovering in the single digits, and the owner, a voice over the phone that sounded like gravel grinding against rusted metal, didn't ask for a background check. He just asked if I could stay awake from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and if I was good at following instructions. I said yes to both. If I had known what instructions meant in the context of this godforsaken patch of asphalt, I would have starved before setting foot in that glass booth. The drive out there should have been my first warning. The station is located on a stretch of Route 93 that feels like it fell off the map. You leave the neon haze of Las Vegas, past the suburbs, and then nothing. Just an endless, oppressive void of black scrub brush and dust. By the time the flickering halogen sign of the Midway appeared on the horizon, glowing like a dying ember in a sea of ink, I hadn't seen another pair of headlights for 40 minutes. My car, an old sedan that rattled when it idled, felt incredibly small against the backdrop of the high desert. I pulled into the lot. The station was a relic from the 70s, boasting 4 pumps that looked like robotic sentinels and a main building that was essentially a glass box fortified with concrete. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sound that wasn't just audible, it was physical. It was a low-frequency drone that seemed to vibrate in your teeth. I parked, grabbed my thermos of coffee, and stepped out. The silence of the desert hit me instantly. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a library. It was a predatory silence, the kind where you feel like something is holding its breath, waiting for you to make a mistake. The key was under the mat, just like the gravel voiced man had said. I let myself in, locking the heavy glass door behind me immediately. Inside, it smelled of stale pine sol, old cigarettes, and something metallic, like copper or dried blood. The counter was cluttered with impulse buys. Beef jerky that looked fossilized, energy shots, and cheap sunglasses. But what caught my eye immediately was the binder. It was sitting right next to the cash register, thick, black, and worn at the edges. A piece of masking tape on the cover read, OPERATIONS Manuel, and Night ROTOCOLS. I settled onto the stool behind the counter, the buzzing of the lights outside seeping through the glass. I figured I had 8 hours of boredom ahead of me. I was wrong. The first hour passed agonizingly slowly. I wiped down the counter, rearranged the candy bars, and stared out at the darkness beyond the pumps. The darkness out here is heavy. It doesn't just sit, it presses against the glass. You start to see shapes in it, tricks of the light and your own tired mind. Around 11:15 p.m., I decided to open the binder. I expected a list of prices, emergency numbers for the sheriff, maybe instructions on how to reboot the card readers. The first page was standard stuff. How to clock in, where the mop bucket was. But when I turned to the section labeled Night Shift Protocols, the handwriting changed. It wasn't the printed, professional font of the earlier pages. This was handwritten, scrawled in frantic, heavy ballpoint pen that had nearly torn through the paper. There was no preamble. No welcome to the team. Just a numbered list that made absolutely no sense. Rule 1. The doors remain locked from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. Transactions are to be conducted through the sliding security drawer only. Do not open the door for anyone. Not for the police. Not for a crying child. Not even if you see yourself standing outside screaming for help. I chuckled, a dry sound in the empty room. Okay, I muttered to myself. Hazing the new guy. Classic. I kept reading, expecting the punchline. Rule 2. Keep the overhead light above pump 4 on at all times. If the bulb blows, replace it immediately. There are spares under the counter. If you cannot replace it within 2 minutes, lock yourself in the back office and close your eyes until sunrise. Do not listen to the scratching. Rule 3. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., a black 1950s sedan may pull up to pump 2. Do not look at the driver. Authorize the pump remotely. Do not speak over the intercom. Take the cash from the drawer only after the car has completely vanished from the horizon. Rule 4. If the phone rings and the caller ID reads, "You ain't known," answer it. If there is static, hang up. If there is a voice that sounds like your mother, apologize for your sins and hang up. If there is silence, do not hang up until they do. Rule 5. The coyotes in this region do not walk on 2 legs. If you see a figure standing upright near the edge of the light that looks like a dog, turn off the interior lights and hide behind the counter. It can't see you if the lights are off, but it can smell your fear. The list went on, reaching 20 specific, insane instructions. I tossed the binder back onto the counter. It had to be a joke. Some creative writing project left by the last bored teenager who worked here. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam fogging up the air slightly. I tried to shake off the unease, but the words stuck with me. Not even if you see yourself standing outside. Who comes up with that? I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. The buzzing of the light seemed to pitch up a notch, becoming a whine that drilled into my temples. I looked out at pump 4. It was the furthest one out, right on the edge where the concrete gave way to the desert scrub. The light above it flickered once, then steadied. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Just a coincidence, I told myself. Old wiring. Then the phone rang. The shrill sound shattered the silence so violently I nearly dropped my coffee. I stared at the dusty landline unit sitting by the register. It rang again, demanding attention. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver. Why was I nervous? It was probably the owner checking in. Or a wrong number. I looked at the caller ID. The green digital display illuminated a single word, UNKNOWN. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was just a coincidence. Midway Fuel. This is Caleb, I said, my voice sounding braver than I felt. Static. It wasn't just white noise. It sounded wet, thick, like heavy breathing through a mouthful of water. I remembered Rule 4. If there is static, hang up. I slammed the receiver down, my fingers trembling slightly. Stop it, I whispered. You're psyching yourself out. I stood up and paced the small enclosure. I needed fresh air, but then I looked at the clock. 11:58 p.m. Rule 1 echoed in my head. The doors remained locked from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. I walked to the door. My hand gripped the lock. It was already engaged, but I twisted the deadbolt just to be sure. As the clock on the wall clicked over to midnight, the atmosphere in the station shifted. It's hard to describe, but the air felt thinner, sharper. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to harmonize with the buzzing lights outside, creating a dissonant chord that put my teeth on edge. I went back to the binder. I needed to see the rest of it. If this was a prank, it was elaborate. If it wasn't, well, I didn't want to think about that. I flipped the page. Rule 6. We do not sell tobacco to the man in the trench coat. He will ask for a brand that hasn't existed since 1920. Tell him we are out of stock. Do not accept the coins he offers. They are not currency. Rule 7. Sometimes the sandstorms blow in without wind. If the windows become obscured by dust but the flags outside are hanging limp, do not look at the patterns in the sand. They are trying to communicate. Reading them grants them permission to enter. I was reading Rule 8 when the motion sensor on the automatic doors chimed. Bing bong! I jumped, spinning around to face the entrance. The glass doors were stationary, locked tight. Beyond them, the forecourt was empty. No cars, no people, just the pumps standing like silent idols and the vast, consuming night. Bing bong! The sensor triggered again. It was detecting something right in front of the door. I squinted, leaning over the counter. The floodlights from the canopy cast harsh shadows, but there was nothing there. Just moths throwing themselves against the glass. Bing bong! Bing bong! Bing bong! The chime went rapid fire, a manic electronic pulse. Something was standing right there, invisible, pressing against the sensor's range. Or maybe the sensor was just broken. That was the logical explanation. Faulty wiring, just like pump 4. Pump 4. I looked past the phantom-triggered doors toward the far pump. The light was flickering again. On, off, on, off. A rhythmic strobe. And then, for a split second, in the moment of darkness between flashes, I saw it. Something was standing next to the pump. It was tall. Too tall. It looked like a person stretched on a rack, limbs elongated and thin as reeds. It was pale, a sickly white that stood out against the black desert. When the light flickered back on, the figure was gone. I rubbed my eyes hard. Lack of sleep, I muttered. Stress, paranoia. But my hands were shaking so badly, I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady them. I grabbed the binder again, flipping back to Rule 2. Keep the overhead light above pump 4 on at all times. If you cannot replace it within 2 minutes, lock yourself in the back office. The light above pump 4 popped. It didn't just flicker out, the bulb exploded. I saw the shower of sparks rain down onto the concrete, leaving the far edge of the station in total darkness. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my chest. The darkness around pump 4 wasn't empty. I could feel eyes on me. I remembered the figure, the stretch thing. It was out there in the blind spot I had just created. If you cannot replace it within 2 minutes, there was a supply closet under the counter. I scrambled, tearing open the cabinet doors. Cleaning supplies, rolls of receipt paper, a first aid kit. Where were the bulbs? I threw a box of tissues behind me, digging frantically. My breath came in short, jagged gasps. Come on, come on, I hissed. I found a cardboard sleeve. Halogen floodlight? I grabbed it and stood up. But then I froze. To replace the bulb, I would have to go outside. I would have to unlock the door, step out into the night, walk past the other pumps, and climb a ladder directly under the spot where the bulb had blown, directly into the dark. I looked at the clock. 12:05 a.m. Rule 1. Do not open the door for anyone, not even if you see yourself standing outside screaming for help. But Rule 2 said to replace the bulb. The rules were contradictory. Or were they? Rule 1 was about opening the door for something entering. Did it apply to me leaving? I looked at pump 4. The darkness there seemed to be expanding, creeping like oil across the concrete toward pump 3. And then I heard it. Even through the thick safety glass, sound carries in the desert. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like metal and concrete. Or claws. It was coming from the darkness of pump 4, inching closer to the light. If you cannot replace it within 2 minutes, lock yourself in the back office and close your eyes until sunrise. I had wasted too much time looking for the bulb. 2 minutes had definitely passed. The scratching was getting louder, faster. It sounded angry. I dropped the bulb. I bolted for the heavy steel door of the back office located behind the cigarette racks. I slammed it shut and threw the deadbolt, sliding down to the floor with my back against the metal. The room was pitch black, save for the sliver of light coming from under the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms over my ears. Do not listen to the scratching. The sound changed. It wasn't on the concrete anymore. It was on the glass of the front of the store. Long, agonizing squeals of something hard dragging against the window pane. It circled the building. I could hear it moving along the wall, searching for an opening. Then it stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. I sat there for what felt like hours, my heart thudding like a trapped bird. I didn't dare open my eyes. The image of that pale, stretched thing burned in my mind. Was it gone, or was it waiting? Eventually, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a dull, aching exhaustion. I checked my watch by the glow of the radium dial. 1:30 a.m. The scratching had stopped an hour ago. I felt foolish. A grown man hiding in a closet because a light bulb blew and a coyote scratched the door. That's what it was. Just a coyote. I stood up, my legs cramping. I needed to go back out there. I needed to man the register. If the owner checked the cameras and saw me hiding in the back, I'd be fired. And I needed this money. God help me. I needed the money. I took a deep breath and unlocked the office door. I cracked it open, peeking out. The store was empty. The fluorescent lights still buzzed. The darkness outside Pump 4 was still absolute, but nothing moved there. I stepped back behind the counter, my body tense, ready to bolt at the slightest noise. I looked at the glass front door. There were scratches, deep, white gouges in the reinforced glass. They were too high for a coyote. They were at head height, and there were 4 of them, parallel like fingers. I swallowed the lump in my throat. The rules. They were real. All of them. I grabbed the binder again, clutching it like a holy text. I needed to know what was coming next. I scanned down to Rule 3. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., a black 1950s sedan may pull up. I looked at the digital clock on the register, 1:55 a.m. 5 minutes. I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared for this. But as I stared at the gouges in the glass, I realized something terrifying. The scratching hadn't been an attempt to get in. It was a test, a prod, to see if I would break Rule 1 and open the door to investigate. I had passed, barely, but the night was young. The desert was waking up. And as the wind began to howl outside, sounding suspiciously like human voices screaming in the distance, I realized that I wasn't just a cashier anymore. I was the gatekeeper. I set the binder down and stared at the empty highway. 2 headlights appeared in the distance. They were dim, yellow, and spaced wide apart. Not the crisp blue LEDs of a modern car. These were old incandescent beams cutting through the dust. They were getting closer. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Rule 3. Black sedan. Don't look at the driver. The car slowed down. It was a sleek, matte black shape, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. It looked like a hearse without the back cabin. A vintage Lincoln or Cadillac, I couldn't tell. It rolled silently into the station. No engine noise, just the crunch of tires on gravel. It glided past Pump 1, past the dark void of Pump 4. It came to a stop at Pump 2 exactly as the rule predicted. My instinct was to look. It's human nature to look at the customer. I forced my head down, staring intently at the cash register screen. My peripheral vision screamed at me. I could see the car there, a massive dark bulk. The intercom buzzed. I flinched. The rule said, authorize the pump remotely. Do not speak over the intercom. I reached out, my finger hovering over the Pump 2 authorize button. B, Z, 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 T. The intercom sounded again. A demand. I pressed the button. The pump whirred to life outside. I could hear the car door open. It sounded heavy, like a vault door. Footsteps on the concrete. Slow, deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. They sounded like hard-soled shoes, or hooves. I kept my eyes glued to the counter. I started counting the packs of gum in the display box. 1, 2, 3, 4. The footsteps stopped. They were right on the other side of the glass, right in front of me. I could feel a gaze burning into the top of my head. It felt like standing in front of an open blast furnace. The heat was palpable. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. A hand reached into the sliding security drawer. I saw it from the corner of my eye. It was wearing a leather glove, but the glove was wrong. The fingers were too long, too many joints, and the leather looked wet. It placed a single bill in the tray and slid it shut. The tray rattled as it locked into place on my side. I stared at the bill. It wasn't a 20. It wasn't a 50. It was a piece of parchment, yellowed and brittle. The ink was a dark, rusty red. In the center, where George Washington should have been, was a drawing of a weeping eye. The footsteps turned away. Clack, clack, clack. The nozzle was replaced. The heavy car door slammed shut. The silence returned. I waited. Take the cash from the drawer only after the car has completely vanished from the horizon. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited until I couldn't hear the tires anymore. I waited 10 minutes after that. Only then did I dare to look up. The forecourt was empty. But on the concrete near pump 2 was a puddle. It was thick, black, and viscous. It was bubbling. I looked down at the parchment in the tray. The weeping eye seemed to be looking right at me. And then I noticed the writing in the corner of the bill. It was tiny, barely legible. I squinted to read it. He knows you're new. He's coming back for the change. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had survived the first few hours, but the note on the bill suggested the worst was yet to come. The night shift at the Midway wasn't just a job. It was a game of chess against forces I couldn't comprehend, and I had just made my first move. I just prayed it wouldn't be my last. As I stared at the dark horizon, a new sound began to emerge from the desert. Not the wind, not a car, but a low, rhythmic chanting rising from the sands, getting louder with every beat of my heart. The customers from beyond the veil were gathering, and the rulebook was the only thing standing between me and the abyss. I stared at the parchment bill in the sliding drawer. The cryptic message, "He's coming back for the change," searing itself into my retinas. The paper felt raw, too heavy, like cured skin, and it radiated a faint, dry heat. My first instinct was to shove it in my pocket to hide the evidence of the impossible transaction I'd just witnessed. But the survival instinct that was rapidly awakening within me screamed, "No!" I grabbed the black binder, my fingers leaving sweaty smears on the plastic cover, and flipped frantically through the pages. I needed a protocol for non-standard currency. There was a protocol for everything in this hellhole. There had to be one for this. I found it near the back, under a section titled Anomalous Transactions. Rule 9. If a customer pays with currency that predates 1900, appears to be made of organic material, or contains threatening messages, do not place it in the cash register. It will infect the other bills. Drop it immediately into the floor safe beneath the counter. If the safe is full, burn the currency in the sink. Do not inhale the smoke. I wasted no time. I didn't want to touch the thing, so I used a pair of tongs from the hot dog roller grill, which was currently empty and spinning slowly, glistening with old grease, to pick up the parchment. As the metal touched the paper, a sound hissed through the room like a drop of water hitting a hot skillet. I gritted my teeth, suppressing a yelp, and dropped the bill into the narrow slit of the floor safe. As the paper slipped into the darkness of the metal box, I heard a sound that froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't the metallic clink of paper hitting a pile of cash. It was a wet, guttural gulp, followed by a satisfied burp that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. The safe wasn't just a container. It was a mouth. I kicked the rug back over the safe, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Okay, I panted, leaning back against the cigarette rack. Okay, rule followed. Safe fed. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. The air in the station had grown heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and sulfur. The digital clock flickered. 2:15 a.m. I had nearly 4 hours left. I needed to know more. I pulled the binder closer, treating it like a shield. The rules were getting more specific, more nonsensical, and yet they were the only lifeline I had. Rule 10. At 2:30 a.m., the slushing machine may begin to mix flavors on its own. If the swirling liquid turns a deep obsidian black, pull the drainage plug immediately. Do not let the cup fill. If the black liquid overflows, do not step in it. It is not ice. It is void. Rule 11. Do not look at your reflection in the bathroom mirror between 2:45 a.m. and 3:15 a.m. You might see someone standing behind you, and if you make eye contact with them in the glass, they will swap places with you. I looked up at the slushy machine on the counter. The blue raspberry and cherry reservoirs were churning sluggishly, normal for now, but the bathroom rule, a cold sweat broke out on my neck. I realized with dawning horror that I had left the bathroom door slightly ajar earlier. From where I sat, if I leaned just 2 inches to the left, I would be able to see the mirror. I sat perfectly still, rigid as a corpse. My bladder suddenly felt full, a nervous reaction to the prohibition, but there was no way in hell I was going into that tiled room. I kept my eyes fixed forward, refusing to let my gaze drift left. But peripheral vision is a curse. From the corner of my eye, I could see the sliver of the bathroom door, and in that sliver, the darkness seemed to be moving. Ignore it, I told myself. Focus on the job. But what was the job? Serving monsters, feeding floor safes. I looked out at the forecourt. The wind had picked up, whipping tumbleweeds across the illuminated concrete. They skittered like giant spiders. Then I saw him. A man was standing at pump 3. I hadn't seen a car pull up. There was no vehicle, just a man. He was dressed in a mechanic's jumpsuit, stained with grease, holding a red gas can. He looked normal enough, except for the way he was standing. He was perfectly motionless, not swaying in the wind that was bending the scrub brush around him. His head was tilted down, obscured by a dirty baseball cap. I checked the time. 2:42 a.m. I scanned the binder. There was no specific rule about a mechanic at pump 3, but there was Rule 12. Rule 12. Stranded travelers are rare. If someone approaches on foot carrying a gas can, check their shadow. If they don't cast one, or if their shadow is moving independently of their body, turn off the pump intercom and hide under the counter until they leave. Do not let them see you. I looked at the floor beneath pump 3. The overhead floodlights were bright, casting sharp, elongated shadows from the pumps and the trash cans. The man stood there, solid and real, but beneath him, nothing. The concrete was uniformly illuminated. He cast no shadow. My stomach dropped. I reached for the intercom switch to ensure it was off, my hand shaking. The man raised his head slowly. I gasped. Where his face should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a blank, fleshy slate. As if hearing my gasp through the glass, the faceless man turned his head directly toward me. He raised the gas can and pointed it at the station. Then he started walking. He didn't walk like a human. His knees bent backward, like a flamingo or a goat, giving his gait a jarring, disjointed rhythm. Snap step. Snap step, he was coming for the door. I dropped to the floor, scrambling under the counter space. I curled into a ball, jamming my knees against my chest, squeezing my eyes shut. Hide under the counter until they leave. I listened. Thump. He was at the glass. Thump. Thump. He was knocking. Not with a fist, but with something hard. Maybe his forehead or that red gas can. Hello, a voice called out. It was muffled by the glass, but clear enough. It sounded perfectly normal. A friendly, middle-aged male voice. Hey, buddy, I'm out of gas. Can you help me out? The dissonance between the horrific, faceless thing I had seen and the pleasant, neighborly voice was nauseating. It was a lure, a trap. I can see you in there, the voice said, sounding a little less friendly now. I just need a gallon. Come on, open up. It's cold out here. I clamped my hands over my mouth to stifle my breathing. The floor under the counter was dusty, smelling of old receipts and fear. Thump, thump, thump. The banging grew violent. The glass shuddered. Open the door. The voice shrieked, distortion creeping in. It sounded like two voices overlapping now. One human, one screeching like grinding metal. I know the rules. Caleb, I know you're in there. He knew my name. How did he know my name? The rules won't save you. The thing screamed. Open the door and let me in. I have something to show you. It's beautiful. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter, tears leaking out. I started reciting the alphabet in my head, anything to drown out the voice. A, B, C, D. Suddenly, the slushy machine behind me gurgled loud enough to be heard over the banging. I froze. Rule 10. At 2:30 a.m., if the liquid turns black, I checked my watch. 2:48 a.m. I had been hiding for minutes. The banging at the door was relentless, but the gurgling from the machine was getting louder, wetter. It sounded like a drain backing up with sewage. I was trapped between two rules. If I stayed under the counter, the machine might overflow with void, whatever that was. If I stood up to fix it, the faceless man would see me. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the sweet syrup of blue raspberry anymore. It smelled like rot, like a grave opened after a week of rain. I had to look. I carefully peeled one eye open and peeked over the edge of the counter. The faceless man was still at the door, but he wasn't looking in. He was licking the glass. A long gray tongue, emerging from nowhere on that smooth face, was dragging slimy streaks across the pane. I turned my head to the slushy machine. The canister on the left was swirling violently. The liquid was pitch black, swirling like a mini tornado. It was rising, fast. It was inches from the top. Do not let the cup fill. If the black liquid overflows, I had to move. I had to make a choice. Die by the thing outside or die by the void inside. I chose the inside. The faceless man couldn't get in as long as the door was locked. Rule 1. The machine was the immediate threat. I took a breath and surged upward. I grabbed a large cup, jammed it under the nozzle, and pulled the release handle. The black sludge poured out. It was thick, viscous, heavier than liquid. It hit the bottom of the cup with a heavy thud rather than a splash. As it flowed, I could hear whispering coming from the liquid itself. Thousands of tiny, overlapping voices screaming in agony. The smell was overpowering. I gagged, tears streaming down my face. I watched the machine, praying for the level to drop. It was draining, but slowly. Thump. I froze. The banging had stopped. I risked a glance at the door. The faceless man was gone. I didn't feel relief. I felt a spike of adrenaline so sharp it was painful. Where did he go? I kept pouring the black sludge. The cup was nearly full. I grabbed another one, swapping them out with trembling hands. I didn't spill a drop. The second cup filled. The machine finally sputtered, the black swirl receding, replaced by the normal blue syrup. I released the handle. I stood there, panting, two large cups of nightmares steaming on the counter. Then I heard the tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the side window, the one right next to the slushy machine, the one I was standing directly in front of. I turned my head slowly. The faceless man was pressed against the glass. But he wasn't faceless anymore. He had my face. It was like looking into a mirror, but wrong. The eyes were too wide, the smile stretching too far, reaching the ears. It was a caricature of me wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit. The thing that was Caleb raised a hand and waved. Its fingers were broken, bent at impossible angles. It mouthed words through the glass. I couldn't hear them, but I could read the lips perfectly. Open the door. I stumbled back, knocking the cups of black sludge onto the floor. Rule 10. If the black liquid overflows, do not step in it. The cups hit the tile. The lids popped off. The black liquid spilled out, but it didn't puddle. It hissed and ate into the linoleum, burning through the floor like concentrated acid. Smoke rose up, forming vague skull-like shapes before dissipating. I jumped backward, landing on the rubber mat behind the register, narrowly missing the spreading pool of void. The me outside laughed, a silent, mime-like convulsion of its shoulders. And then, seemingly bored, it turned and walked away into the desert darkness. I stood there, shaking, surrounded by the smell of burning floor and ancient rot. I checked the time. 3:05 a.m. I had survived the mechanic. I had survived the machine. But the night was shifting gears. The phone rang again. I stared at it. If the caller ID reads unknown, but the ID didn't say unknown. It displayed a string of numbers that were all zeros. 0, 0, 0. 0, 0, 0. 0, 0, 0, 0. I didn't recall a rule for this. I grabbed the binder, my hands slippery with sweat. I flipped pages, carrying one in my haste. Rule 13. The payphone on the corner of the lot has been disconnected since 2004. If the phone inside the station rings with all zeros, do not answer it. It is the payphone calling you. If you answer, you will hear what the desert hears, and the desert never stops screaming. I stared at the phone. It rang again and again. Then, through the glass front of the store, I saw the payphone out on the edge of the lot. The receiver was off the hook, dangling by its metal cord, swinging gently in the wind. And standing next to it, holding nothing, was a woman in a white dress. She was facing away from me, looking out into the deep desert. Her hair was long and matted. She wasn't holding the phone, but the indoor phone kept ringing, an insistent drilling noise that felt like it was trying to rupture my eardrums. Don't answer. Don't answer. I let it ring. 10 times. 20 times. Finally, it stopped. Out by the payphone, the woman in white slowly turned around. She was too far away to see her features clearly, but I saw her raise her arm. She pointed directly at the station. No, not at the station. Above it. She was pointing at the roof. A heavy thud shook the ceiling tiles above my head. Dust rained down onto the counter. Something heavy had just landed on the roof. I looked up at the drop ceiling, at the water-stained tiles. Scritch. Scritch. It wasn't the scratching of claws this time. It was the sound of something heavy dragging itself, and it was right above me. I looked at the binder. I needed a rule for the roof. I needed it now. I found a scribbled note in the margin of the last page, written in a different handwriting. Shaky, terrified script. Rule 19. They like to come in through the vents. If you hear them on the roof, turn the act to the coldest setting immediately. They hate the cold. If you don't, they will unscrew the vent over the register and pull you up. I looked at the thermostat on the wall. It was set to 72 degrees. The vent was directly above my head. I could see the screws vibrating as something moved on the other side. I lunged for the thermostat. My finger jammed the down arrow. 70, 65, 60, 55. The ACT unit on the roof kicked on with a roar. A blast of freezing air shot out of the vent, blowing dust into my eyes. A screech echoed through the metal ductwork. A sound like a hawk screeching through a distortion pedal. The thumping on the roof became frantic, moving away from the vent, scurrying toward the back of the building. I slumped against the wall, shivering in the sudden Arctic blast. The temperature in the store was plummeting, but I didn't dare turn it up. I was freezing, exhausted, and terrified. And as I looked out the window, I realized the lights in the forecourt were dimming. The buzzing hum was changing pitch, becoming a low, rhythmic throb. The station was waking up. The entities were testing the perimeter, probing for weaknesses. And I was the only thing keeping the door shut. I looked at the binder again. The next page was stuck together with something sticky. I pried it open. Rule 20. Beware the witching hour, 3:33 a.m. At this time, the laws of physics inside the station are flexible. Gravity may shift. Time may loop. If you see a customer walk in who looks like they are made of static, do not engage. But more importantly, if you hear the radio turn on by itself, do not turn it off. Listen to the broadcast. It will tell you how to survive the next hour. I looked at the clock. 3:30 a.m. 3 minutes. The radio, an old boombox sitting on a shelf behind the counter that I hadn't even noticed before, clicked on. Static filled the room, loud and harsh. Then a voice cut through the white noise. It wasn't a DJ. It was a voice that sounded like grinding stones. Welcome back to the midnight broadcast. The voice croaked. Coming up next. The weather report. Expect a shower of blood with a chance of teeth. But first, a message for our employee. The radio went silent for a second. Caleb, the radio whispered. Look behind you. Caleb, the radio whispered. Look behind you. My muscles locked. Every instinct I had honed over 26 years of living screamed at me to turn around, to confront the threat. But a newer, sharper instinct, the one forged in the last 3 hours of hell, screamed, don't. The voice on the radio wasn't the grinding stone voice of the host anymore. It was smoother, syrupy, and deceptively intimate. It was a lure. I kept my eyes glued to the radio, my breathing shallow. Slowly, trembling, I lifted my gaze to the convex security mirror mounted in the corner of the ceiling. The one meant to catch shoplifters. The reflection showed the counter, the back of my head, and the aisles behind me. The world behind me was gone, or rather, it was inverted. In the mirror, the aisles of chips and motor oil weren't sitting on the floor. They were hanging from a ceiling of darkness, and the floor was an infinite abyss of swirling gray mist. Floating in that mist, swimming through the air like eels in water, were shapes. Vaguely human, translucent, and glowing with a faint bioluminescent pulse. One of them was drifting inches from the back of my neck, its mouth open wide, ready to inhale. I slammed my eyes shut and gripped the counter. Rule 20. Gravity may shift. Time may loop. Nice try. I choked out, my voice cracking. I'm not turning around. The radio hissed with static, a sound of frustration. Smart boy. The gravelly host's voice returned, replacing the smooth tempter. You survived the bait. Now survived the shift. The sensation hit me instantly. My stomach lurched into my throat. The coffee cup on the counter didn't fall over. It floated upward, rotating slowly, spilling brown liquid that formed perfect spheres in the air. My feet left the floor. I grabbed the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, anchoring myself as gravity decided that down was now left. My body swung sideways, my legs dangling toward the wall where the cigarette rack stood. The blood rushed to my head. The station groaned, the metal and glass protesting the sudden violation of physics. Current weather report. The radio crackled. Heavy turbulence with a chance of intrusion. The front door chime rang. Bing bong. I was hanging sideways, holding onto the bolted-down counter for dear life, looking at the door. It slid open. But what walked in wasn't a person. It was a silhouette cut out of television static. It crackled and popped, a walking void of white noise shaped like a man in a fedora. It stepped inside, walking on the wall as if it were the floor. To the static man, the gravity shift was normal. He strolled past the floating display of beef jerky, the sparks from his body arching to the metal shelves. I watched, terrified, as he approached the counter. He stopped, standing on the wall directly in front of my face. I was dangling horizontally. He was standing vertically on a vertical surface. I require, the static man spoke, but his voice wasn't sound. It was a frequency that vibrated my fillings, the unfiltered perception. I stared at him. The buzzing of his form was making my vision blur. The what? He pointed a finger made of fuzz and interference at the rack of sunglasses behind the counter, but not the cheap aviators. He was pointing at a dusty cardboard box on the bottom shelf, one I hadn't noticed before. It was labeled simply, Specs. I couldn't let go of the counter with both hands or I'd fall across the room into the wall. I hooked one arm through the handle of the cash drawer and reached out with the other, straining. My fingertips brushed the box. I clawed it closer. Inside was a single pair of glasses. The frames were made of raw iron, and the lenses were pitch black. Put them on the counter. The static man vibrated. I slapped the glasses onto the laminate. The static man reached out, his hand passing through the plastic sneeze guard like it was smoke, and took them. He didn't pay. He didn't speak. He just placed the iron glasses onto his face of white noise. Immediately, the static ceased. For a split second, I saw a face. It was ancient, skin like cracked parchment, eyes burning with a blue fire that seemed to hold the birth of stars. He looked at me, and I felt my soul being weighed on a scale. Insufficient, he whispered. Then he shattered. He didn't explode. He just broke apart into 1,000 jagged pixels of light and vanished. Thud. Gravity snapped back. I fell hard, my hips slamming into the floor mats. The coffee sphere splashed down around me. The station settled with a groan of relief. I lay there for a moment, groaning, checking for broken bones. The radio clicked off. The witching hour was over. I dragged myself up, using the counter for support. My body felt bruised and battered, but I was alive. I checked the time. 3:45 a.m. Okay, I panted. Okay, gravity is back. Static man is gone. Just breathe. But the night wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. A low rumble began to vibrate the floor. It was deeper than a car engine, heavier than a semi-truck. It sounded like the earth itself was growling. I looked out the window. A bus was pulling into the lot. It was massive, hulking behemoth of rusted metal and dark windows. It looked like a Greyhound from the 1960s that had driven through hell and kept going. The paint was peeled away to reveal gray steel underneath, and the destination sign above the windshield didn't list a city. It just scrolled a single word over and over, nowhere. It didn't pull up to the pumps. It pulled up parallel to the front door, its air brakes hissing with the sound that resembled a dying gasp. I scrambled for the binder. Rule 25. I needed Rule 25. Rule 25, the Midnight Express. It runs on a schedule that predates the highway. If it stops, do not look at the passengers. They are not for you to see. The driver will enter. He will ask for a pack of gum. Give him the one marked for the road located under the register. Do not accept money. Accept only the token. And whatever you do, do not let any passenger off the bus. I swallowed hard. Don't let anyone off. Got it. The bus door folded open with a screech. A figure stepped down. The driver was immense. He wore a tattered uniform that might have been blue once, but was now stained a deep brownish black. His cap was pulled low, shading his eyes, but I could see his jaw. It was gray, the skin pulled tight over bone. He walked toward the station with a heavy, lumbering gait. He pushed the door open. The chime rang. Bing bong. The smell hit me instantly. Diesel fumes mixed with formaldehyde. He approached the counter. I kept my eyes on his chin, refusing to look up into the shadow of his cap. Gum, he grunted. His voice sounded like tires crunching on gravel. I reached under the register. My fingers brushed against a cold metal tin. I pulled it out. It was a plain silver tin with the words for the road etched into the lid. It felt freezing to the touch. I placed it on the counter. The driver reached out a hand that was more callous than skin. He took the tin. Then, with his other hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin. He dropped it onto the counter. It wasn't a quarter. It was a heavy gold coin, stamped with the profile of a creature with horns. Payment, he grunted. Thank you, I whispered. He turned to leave. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was going smoothly. Follow the rules. Survive the night. Then I saw movement through the glass. On the bus, a hand pressed against the window. Then another. Then a face. It was a child. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, with pigtails and a bright pink dress. She looked terrified. She was mouthing something. "Help me." My heart stopped. Rule 25 said, "They are not for you to see." But I had seen her. And she looked human. The bus door was still open. The driver was halfway to it. The little girl stood up. She ran down the aisle of the bus. She was heading for the open door. "Do not let any passenger off the bus." Panic flared. If she stepped off that bus onto the gas station lot, I broke the rule. And breaking the rule meant a fate worse than termination. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice echoing in the small shop. The driver stopped. He didn't turn around. He just froze. The little girl reached the stairs of the bus. She was sobbing now, reaching out toward the station lights, toward safety. I couldn't just watch. She was a child. What if the rules were wrong? What if this was a test of humanity? I reached for the door lock switch under the counter. I was going to unlock the door, run out there, and grab her. No, the thought wasn't mine. It was a whisper in my ear, sharp and cold. "Look at her feet." I paused, my hand on the switch. I looked through the glass, focusing on the girl as she descended the bus stairs. She wasn't wearing shoes. And her feet, they weren't feet. They were hooves. Cloven, goat-like hooves hidden beneath the lace of her socks. And as she stepped onto the asphalt, the air around her shimmered. The innocent face flickered. For a millisecond, I saw the truth. A maw of needle teeth, eyes like black pits. She wasn't a victim. She was a predator escaping its cage. I slammed my hand onto the intercom button. "Driver," I screamed. "Passenger." The driver spun around with terrifying speed. He saw the girl just as her hoof touched the pavement. He roared. It wasn't a human sound. It was the blast of a semi-truck horn, amplified 1,000 times. He lunged, his arms stretching out unnaturally long, grabbing the girl by the back of her pink dress. She shrieked. A sound that shattered the glass of the slushy machine behind me. She clawed at the air, her face melting away to reveal the monstrosity beneath, snapping her jaws at the driver. He hauled her back up the stairs and threw her into the darkness of the bus aisle. He slammed the door shut. He turned back to me. He tipped his cap. Beneath the brim, I saw 2 glowing red eyes. He climbed back in. The engine roared to life, spewing black smoke. The bus reversed, then peeled out onto the highway, disappearing into the night as if it had never been there. I collapsed onto the stool, shaking violently. The shattered glass of the slushy machine crunched under my boots. I had almost let it out. I had almost opened the door for a demon in a dress. The coin on the counter was vibrating. I looked at it. The gold token was humming, spinning slowly in place. I remembered the rule. Accept only the token. I picked it up. It was warm now. As I held it, a voice echoed in my head. Not a whisper, but a clear, distinct sentence. "The manager is coming at 4 a.m. Prepare the ledger." I dropped the coin. The manager? The gravel-voiced man on the phone? I grabbed the binder. I flipped to the section marked 4 a.m. There was nothing. The pages were blank. I flipped back and forth. Nothing. No rules for 4 a.m. No instructions for the manager. What? I hissed. What am I supposed to do? I looked around the station. It felt different now. Exposed. The buzzing of the lights had stopped. The silence was absolute. Then I noticed something on the counter. The dusty note I had found earlier, the one with the weird tips from the previous employee. I had shoved it under the register tray. I pulled it out. It was a crumpled napkin with hasty scribbles. If you make it to 4 a.m., you're doing better than most. But this is where it gets tricky. The rules in the binder are for the customers. There are no rules for him. When he comes, don't speak. Don't breathe. And for the love of God, don't let him see your eyes. He will check the books, If the count is off by even a penny, you become part of the inventory. I looked at the cash register. I had been conducting strange transactions all night. The parchment bill in the safe, the gold coin, the $0 receipts for the gum. How was I supposed to balance the books when the currency was souls and gold tokens? I opened the register drawer. It was empty. No, not empty. The cash was gone. In its place was a layer of fine, gray dust, and resting on top of the dust was a single human finger bone. The lights in the store flickered and died. The only illumination came from the moonlight filtering through the dusty windows and the red glow of the digital clock. 3:59 a.m. A car door slammed outside. Not a ghostly slam. A real, heavy, metal slam. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. Slow. Methodical. Heavy. I looked out. A man was walking toward the door. He wore a pristine white suit that seemed to glow in the darkness. He carried a briefcase. He had a face, but it was too perfect, too symmetrical, like a plastic mask molded into a handsome approximation of a human male. He stopped at the door. He didn't knock. He didn't wait. He simply reached through the glass, his hand phasing through the solid material like it was water, and unlocked the deadbolt from the inside. The door swung open. The manager stepped in. The temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees in a second. My breath plumed in front of me. He walked to the counter, placed the briefcase down, and clicked the latches open. He looked up. I remembered the note. Don't let him see your eyes. I squeezed my eyes shut, bowing my head, my hands gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles ached. Caleb, he said. His voice was beautiful. It sounded like a choir of angels, but singing in a minor key that made my teeth ache. Let us review your performance. I heard the rustle of papers. Sector 4 light bulb replaced? No. Failed. My heart hammered. Slushy machine purged? Yes. Pass. Bus passenger contained? Yes. Pass. Cash drawer balance. The silence stretched. It felt like an eternity. I could hear him sifting through the dust in the drawer. I could hear the finger bone clatter against the plastic. Caleb, he said softly. Where is the parchment? I couldn't speak. Don't speak. I can smell it, he sang. It's in the floor safe. You fed the hungry box. Very good. I felt a cold hand brush my cheek. It felt like marble. You have potential, he whispered. But the night is long, and the hardest test is yet to come. You have followed the rules of the station. Now, you must face the rules of the desert. He snapped the briefcase shut. I am leaving you a gift, he said. You will need it for the sunrise. Do not open it until the whispers stop. Footsteps. The door opened and closed. The lock clicked back into place on its own. I waited 5 minutes before I dared to open my eyes. The manager was gone. The lights flickered back on with a deafening buzz. The register drawer was closed. On the counter, where the briefcase had been, sat a small wooden box. It was carved with symbols I didn't recognize, symbols that seemed to writhe and move if I looked at them too long. And the silence. The silence was gone. Outside, the wind was howling. But it wasn't whined. Caleb, join us. The whispers were coming from the desert. Thousands of them. And they were getting closer. I looked at the wooden box. Do not open it until the whispers stop. But the whispers weren't stopping. They were turning into screams. Something slammed against the side of the building. Then, again. The walls shook. The glass vibrated. I grabbed the binder. I needed to know what lived in the desert. I turned to the very last page, the one I hadn't looked at yet. It was ripped out. All that was left was a jagged edge of paper and 3 words written on the back cover in blood-red ink. They are here. The power cut out again. This time for good. The darkness was absolute. And in the dark, The glass front of the station shattered inward. The darkness wasn't empty. It was heavy, physical, pressing against my eyeballs like a weighted blanket. The sound of the glass front of the station shattering wasn't a crash. It was an explosion, a violent implosion of safety that left my ears ringing. But the ringing quickly faded, replaced by the wind. And the wind carried voices. I didn't wait to see what had broken in. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping on the linoleum, kicking aside the debris of the night. The spilled slushy cups, the broken glass, the fallen displays. My breath came in ragged gasps, audible and embarrassing in the sudden silence of the station. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of the lights. It was all gone. The only sound was the invasion. Caleb. The whisper came from the broken doorway. It sounded like my father who had been dead for 10 years. Caleb, you forgot to lock the door. Shut up. I hissed through gritted teeth, scrambling onto my hands and knees. I needed a fortress. The counter was too open. The back office had a lock, but the door was hollow core wood. A determined toddler could kick it in. I needed steel. The walk-in cooler. It was located in the back corner of the store, past the rows of sodas and energy drinks. It was basically a vault insulated with 4 inches of foam and clad in heavy aluminum. I lunged for it, knocking over a stand of potato chips. The bags popped loudly as I trampled them, sounding like gunshots in the quiet. Behind me, I heard the crunch of glass under bare feet. Not one pair of feet. Many. Crunch. 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 They were moving fast. I hit the heavy handle of the cooler door. It was cold, slick with condensation. I yanked it open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. The suction seal engaged with a heavy, satisfying thwomp. I engaged the internal safety latch, a glowing green rod meant to prevent employees from getting trapped. Tonight, it was the only thing keeping me from being harvested. I was surrounded by racks of beer, sodas, and gallons of milk. The air was frigid, biting through my thin uniform shirt. The only light came from the glow-in-the-dark safety latch and the faint, ghostly illumination filtering in through the glass merchandising doors that faced the shop floor. I crouched behind a stack of beer cases, shivering violently. I watched the glass doors. Through the condensation and the rows of Monster Energy drinks, I could see the shop floor. It was a nightmare shadow play. Figures were moving in the dark. They were tall, impossibly thin, their limbs articulating with too many joints. They moved like insects, jerky and twitching. They were overturning shelves, ripping open packages, not to eat, but to destroy. They were looking for something. They were looking for me. One of them stopped in front of the cooler door, the glass one, where customers reach in to grab a drink. It pressed a face against the glass. I clamped a hand over my mouth. It didn't have a face. It had a smooth, concave surface where features should be, like a spoon pressed into clay. But I could feel it seeing me. It tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed inside the cooler. "We know you're in there, Caleb," a voice whispered. This time, it wasn't my father. It was a woman's voice. Soft, alluring. "It's cold in there. Come out. The desert is warm. We have a fire. Go away." I whimpered, the sound barely escaping my throat. "We just want to talk." The voice shifted, becoming deep, guttural. "We want to tell you about the rules. The real rules." I squeezed my eyes shut. Do not listen to the whispers. That was the unspoken rule. The manager had said to wait until they stopped. But they weren't stopping. They were getting louder. I looked down at the wooden box the manager had left me. It was sitting on the floor between my feet. The carvings on it were glowing faintly, a dull crimson pulse that matched the beat of my heart. I wanted to open it. Every nerve in my body screamed that the answer, the weapon, the salvation was in that box. Open it, the whispers hissed. Open the box. Caleb, it's a gift. My hand reached out. My fingers brushed the latch. No. A memory surfaced. The note from the previous employee. Do not open it until the whispers stop. If I opened it now while they were screaming, I would die. Or worse. I pulled my hand back, burning with the effort. I needed a distraction. I needed to understand what was happening. I looked around the cooler, desperate for a weapon. A glass bottle? A keg? My eyes landed on a loose metal panel near the condenser unit in the ceiling of the cooler. It was slightly askew, hanging by a single screw. Tucked into the gap was something black. I stood up slowly, my knees popping. The creatures outside were still pacing, scratching at the glass doors, but they hadn't tried to break them yet. They were toying with me. I reached up and pulled the black object down. It was a leather-bound journal, covered in frost. I wiped it on my shirt. Embossed on the cover were initials, A.R. Arthur. The guy before me. The one who disappeared. I sank back down behind the beer cases and cracked the journal open. It was too dark to read the fine print, so I fished my lighter out of my pocket. A cheap Bic I kept for smoking breaks I never took. I flicked it. The small flame danced, illuminating the frantic scrawl. The entries weren't dated with days. They were dated with times 1:00:00 p.m. Started the shift. Place gives me the creeps. 1:02:00 am. The rules are real. Saw the dog thing. It smiled at me. I flipped forward, skipping the early panic. I needed the end. I needed to know why Arthur didn't make it. 3 a.m. I figured it out. I found the blueprints in the basement. This isn't a gas station. The pumps aren't connected to fuel tanks. They're connected to the ley lines. The whole building is a cap. A plug over a borehole into somewhere else. I stared at the words. A plug. 4:30 a.m. They're getting louder. The manager isn't human. He's the warden. And we aren't employees. We're the bait. The station needs a living soul inside to keep the seal active. The energy we produce. The fear, the adherence to the rules. That's the fuel. We are the battery. My blood ran cold. I wasn't guarding the station. The station was feeding on me. My terror was powering the lock that kept these things out of the rest of the world. 5:15 a.m., I messed up. I looked at the passenger on the bus. I saw her face. She's inside my head now. She's telling me to open the door. She says if I let them in, they'll let me go. I'm so tired. I just want to sleep. The last entry was scrawled in jagged, heavy strokes. 5:50 a.m. They aren't going to let me go. The manager left me the box. I hear them whispering. They say the box contains a way out, but the whispers, they won't stop. They know I'm going to open it. God forgive me, I'm going to open it. Arthur had opened the box while the whispers were still active. And now Arthur was gone. I looked at the box at my feet. It was vibrating now, buzzing against the metal floor of the cooler. The whispers outside were reaching a crescendo. It sounded like a stadium full of people screaming in agony. "Open it," the voice screamed, sounding like my own voice now. "Open the box! Caleb, end it!" I grabbed the journal and threw it at the door. "No!" I screamed back. "I know what you are. I know what this place is." The screaming stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It was a vacuum. Then a slow, sarcastic clapping began. Clap, clap, clap. I looked through the glass of the drink cooler. Standing in the middle of the dark store, illuminated by the faint moonlight streaming through the shattered front, was a figure. It wasn't a monster. It was a man. He was wearing a Midway Fuel uniform. He looked tired. He looked like me. But it wasn't a reflection. It was him. It was Arthur, or what was left of him. He walked toward the cooler. His skin was gray, and his eyes were sewn shut with thick, black thread. He stopped at the glass door, inches from where I was crouching. He raised a hand and pointed at the safety latch inside the cooler. "You have to let us in, Caleb," Arthur said. His voice didn't move his lips. It emanated from the air around him. "The shift is almost over. If you don't let us in, the manager will be displeased. And you don't want to see what happens when the manager is displeased." "I'm not opening the door," I said, my voice shaking but firm. Arthur smiled. It was a horrible sight. His skin tore at the corners of his mouth. "You don't have to open the door, Caleb. You just have to look." He pressed his hand against the glass. The glass began to fog up, turning frost white. But in the frost, shapes began to form. Images. I saw myself. I saw my apartment. I saw my mother sleeping in her bed. I saw the creature, the faceless man, standing over her. "We are everywhere," Arthur whispered. "The station is just the door, but we have keys to all the rooms. Open the cooler, Caleb, and we will spare her." It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. Rule 1. Not even if you see yourself standing outside screaming for help, they dealt in deception. "You're lying," I spat. "You can't leave the desert. That's why you need me to open the door. You're trapped here." Arthur's smile vanished. He slammed his fist against the glass. The safety glass spiderwebbed. I scrambled back, hitting the rear wall of the cooler. He hit it again. Crack! Shards of glass fell onto the wire racks of soda. He was breaking in. The cooler, my fortress, was failing. I looked at the box. "Do not open it until the whispers stop." The whispers hadn't stopped. They were quiet, but they were there, a low buzzing in the back of my mind. But Arthur wasn't whispering. He was breaking. I had to choose the box or the breach. I grabbed the box. It was hot now, burning my hands. I held it up. "Back off," I yelled. "I'll open it. I swear to God, I'll open it." Arthur paused. He looked at the box, or seemed to, with his sewn eyes. He hissed, recoiling slightly. "You don't know what that is," Arthur growled. "I know it scares you," I countered. "It doesn't scare us," Arthur said, his voice dripping with malice. "It ends us. But it ends you too. It's the reset button, Caleb. Do you want to be reset? A reset." Was that what the manager meant by survival? Suddenly, the temperature in the cooler dropped even further. The breath in my lungs turned to ice crystals. The crimson glow on the box flared blindingly bright, and then the whisper stopped. Completely? No buzzing, no voices, no Caleb, just the sound of the wind outside and the creaking of the damaged glass. I froze. Do not open it until the whisper stopped. They had stopped, but Arthur was still there, staring at me. He looked confused. He tilted his head, listening. "No," he whispered. "It's too early. The sun." I looked at my watch. 5:45 a.m. The whispers hadn't stopped because the entities gave up. They stopped because something else was coming. Something that even the monsters feared. The first gray light of dawn was touching the horizon. Arthur screeched. It was a sound of pure panic. He turned and ran. He didn't fade away. He scrambled on all fours like a frantic animal, knocking over displays as he fled toward the shattered front of the store, diving into the shadows of the receding night. I was alone. I sat there, clutching the box, my heart hammering a hole in my chest. They were gone. I had survived the breach. But the silence was wrong. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of anticipation. I looked down at the box. The crimson glow had turned to a steady, calm blue. The latch clicked audibly. It unlocked itself. I remembered the manager's words. You will need it for the sunrise. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside the box, resting on black velvet, was a single silver object. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a key. It was a whistle. An old-fashioned, sterling silver whistle, like a train conductor might use. Etched into the side was a single word, arrival. I stared at it. A whistle? Then I heard it. A low vibration coming from the floor, the same vibration I had felt when the Midnight Express arrived. But this was stronger. This was shaking the cans of soda off the shelves. I scrambled out of the cooler, stepping over the broken glass. I walked out into the ruined store. The light outside was gray and washed out. The sun was cresting the mountains. I looked toward the highway. The road was gone. In its place were two massive rusted iron rails running parallel to the station. They hadn't been there last night. They stretched infinitely into the desert in both directions. And coming down the track, billowing black smoke that blotted out the rising sun, was a train. It wasn't a normal train. It was a cathedral on wheels. Spires of black iron rose from the cars, gargoyles perched on the smokestacks. It was moving impossibly fast, yet silent, gliding over the rails. It was slowing down. It was coming for the station. I realized then what the station really was. It wasn't a plug. It wasn't just a battery. It was a ticket booth, and my shift wasn't over. It was just beginning. The phone on the counter rang, the landline, the one that had been dead since the power cut. I walked over to it, my boots crunching on the debris. I picked up the receiver. Midway fuel, I whispered, "Good morning, Caleb." The manager's voice sang. "The morning commute is arriving. Did you receive the whistle?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he said. "The passengers on this train are very particular. They have been traveling for a long time. They are hungry. You are to board the train, Caleb." "Board it?" I asked, looking at the monstrosity of iron and smoke screeching to a halt in front of the pumps. "Why?" "Because," the manager said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. "You broke a rule." My blood froze. "What?" "No. I followed every rule. I locked the door. I fed the safe. I didn't look at the bus passengers. You read the journal." The manager said, "Rule 99. Ignorance is protection. Do not seek to know the nature of the station Arthur sought to know. Now Arthur is part of the desert. You sought to know. Now you are part of the crew." The train hissed to a stop. A massive door on the engine hissed open. Steam poured out, smelling of sulfur and roses. "Blow the whistle, Caleb," the manager commanded, "and step aboard. Your night shift is over. Your eternal shift begins now." I stood there, holding the silver whistle. The train loomed over me, a terrifying titan of the industrial hellscape. I looked at the desert. It was empty now, the monsters hiding from the sun. But I knew they were watching. I had two choices. Stay here and wait for the sun to go down again, facing the horrors without the protection of the rules, knowing I was marked. Or get on the train. I looked at the whistle. Arrival. I raised it to my lips. The sound that came out wasn't a whistle. It was a chord, a harmonious, resonant sound that seemed to vibrate the very atoms of the air. The conductor stepped out of the steam. He was tall, wearing a uniform of blue fire. He extended a hand. "Tickets, please," he smiled. And his smile was full of stars. I took a step forward, but then I stopped. I looked at the fuel pumps. I looked at the ruined store. I looked at the binder lying open on the floor where I had dropped it. Rule 99, ignorance is protection. I remembered something else Arthur had written. The station needs a living soul inside to keep the seal active. If I got on the train, the station would be empty. The seal would break. The things in the desert, the faceless man, the static entities, the screaming voices, they wouldn't just be trapped here anymore. They would be free. They would go to the town. They would go to my mother. The manager wanted me on the train to remove the obstacle. He wanted the seal broken. "Caleb." The manager's voice on the phone was sharp now. "Board the train." I looked at the conductor. I looked at the open door of the train. "No," I said into the phone. "Silence." "No." The manager's voice fractured, sounding like cracking ice. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, gripping the whistle tight. "I know what this place is now. It's a cage. And I'm the lock. If I leave, they get out. You will die tonight," the manager hissed. "The night shift is over. The protections are gone. Then I'll make new rules," I said. I hung up the phone. I turned to the conductor. "I'm not boarding. Get off my lot." The conductor stared at me. His starry smile faded. He didn't look angry. He looked impressed. He tipped his cap of blue fire. "As you wish," he boomed. "But the next train doesn't come for a century." He stepped back. The door slammed shut. The train roared, the wheels spinning, sparks showering the station like fireworks. It accelerated with terrifying speed, vanishing into the shimmering heat haze of the morning horizon within seconds. The rails vanished with it, leaving only the cracked asphalt. I was alone, truly alone. The sun was fully up now. The station was a wreck. The windows were gone. The floor was destroyed. The inventory was ruined. But I was still here. I walked over to the counter. I picked up the binder. I found a roll of duct tape in the drawer. I taped the ripped back page. The one that said "They are here," back together. I took a black marker from the cup. I crossed out "They are here." Underneath, in big, bold letters, I wrote, "I am here." I looked around the shattered remains of my prison. I had 12 hours until the sun went down. 12 hours to fix the glass. 12 hours to find a weapon. 12 hours to rewrite the book. I wasn't just the clerk anymore. I was the warden. And tonight, the rules were going to change. I walked to the front, stepping through the empty frame of the door, and looked out at the vast, silent Nevada desert. I took a deep breath of the cold morning air. "Come and get me," I whispered. The sun rising over the Nevada desert didn't bring warmth. It brought a scorching, revealing clarity. In the harsh light of day, the midway fuel stop looked like the victim of a bomb blast. The front safety glass was shattered, the shards glittering like diamonds in the dust. The interior shelves were overturned, aisles flooded with sticky syrup and debris. But the silence was the worst part. The whispers were gone, retreated into the shadows of the scrub brush, waiting for the inevitable return of the dark. I had 12 hours. 12 hours to turn a ruin into a fortress. I didn't waste time mourning my old life. The Caleb who had driven out here looking for a paycheck was dead. He died the moment he refused to board the Midnight Express. The man standing in the wreckage was something else. Something forged in the cold fire of the cooler and tempered by the void. I grabbed the binder, the pages gritty with sand, and walked behind the counter. The phone sat there, silent and dead, the cord severed not by a knife, but by a bite mark. The manager wasn't going to call again. He was coming. Arthur's journal had mentioned a basement. I had never seen a door, but then again, I hadn't been looking with the right eyes. I kicked aside the rubber mats near the slushy machine, revealing a seamless expanse of linoleum. but I could feel a draft, a cold, damp breath seeping up from the floor. I grabbed a crowbar from the supply closet and jammed it into the floor seam. With a grunt of exertion that tore a scream from my dry throat, I pried. The floor didn't crack. It peeled back like dead skin, revealing a heavy iron trapdoor etched with rust-colored warnings in a language that hurt my eyes to look at. I descended. The air down there smelled of ozone and wet earth. It wasn't a storage cellar. It was a machine room. But the machines weren't made of steel and gears. They were organic. Massive, pulsating roots of black material throbbed in the center of the room, hooked up to copper wires that ran up into the ceiling, into the pumps above. Arthur was right. This wasn't a gas station. It was a pacemaker for a hole in the world, and the station above was the interface. On a workbench covered in decades of dust, I found what I needed. Not weapons. Guns would be useless against things that could phase through walls, but supplies for the trade. There were jars of salt mixed with iron filings, rolls of copper tape, and a bucket of black paint that swirled on its own. And there was a new uniform. It wasn't the cheap polyester polo I was wearing. It was a heavy gray trench coat made of a material that felt like canvas but moved like silk. Stitched over the heart was a name tag. It was blank. I spent the day working with a manic energy that wasn't entirely my own. I used the plywood from the back room to board up the shattered front, sealing the gaps with the copper tape. I painted symbols from Arthur's journal onto the wood with the living black paint. Runes of binding and barrier. Every stroke of the brush felt heavy, as if I were carving the air itself. The heat of the day peaked, the mercury hitting 110 degrees, but inside the station, the temperature plummeted. The organic machine in the basement was waking up, feeding off my resolve. By 6 p.m., the station was sealed. It looked like a tomb from the outside, boarded up relic on a lonely highway. But inside, the air hummed with power. I dragged the counter back into place. I restocked the cigarettes, the gum, the chips. I cleaned the floor, sweeping away the glass and the memories of fear. Order. The entities thrived on chaos. I would kill them with order. I took the binder and placed it on the counter. I opened it to the last page where I had written, "I am here." I picked up a pen. The ink in the station's pens was always black, but as I pressed the tip to the paper, it flowed red. Rule 100. The warden is the final authority. All previous debts are null and void. Any entity entering the perimeter without an invitation will be processed as fuel. I slammed the book shut. The sun touched the horizon, bleeding purple and gold across the sky. The shadows stretched, detaching themselves from the rocks and bushes, standing up. The night shift had begun. The first attack didn't come with a bang. It came with a knock. 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 It was polite. Gentle. It came from the boarded-up front door. "We know you're in there, Caleb," a voice called out. It was smooth, cultured, sounding like a late-night radio host. "You've done a marvelous job with the place. Really. The copper tape is a nice touch. Very retro." I stood behind the counter, wearing the gray trench coat. I felt heavy, anchored to the floor. "The store is closed," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. "Closed?" The voice chuckled. "The Midway is never closed. Open up, Caleb. The manager is very impressed with your initiative. He wants to give you a promotion." I promoted myself. I replied, my hand resting on the silver whistle in my pocket. "Leave." The politeness vanished. The boarding on the door groaned as something massive slammed into it. The copper tape flared with green light, sparking violently. "You cannot keep us out." The voice roared, layering with 1,000 screams. "We are the hunger." The wood began to splinter. Claws, long and rusted, punched through the plywood. I didn't flinch. I watched the breach. Rule 1. I whispered. The doors remained locked. I reached under the counter and pulled out the jar of salt and iron filings. I hurled a handful at the breach. As the mixture hit the claws, they smoked and hissed. The creature on the other side shrieked, a sound of pure auditory agony. The claws retracted instantly. But they were just testing the waters. The real assault began a moment later. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The darkness was total, save for the green sparks from the copper tape. And then the floor began to bleed. Black, viscous sludge bubbled up between the tiles. It wasn't the slushy mix this time. It was the stuff from the basement. The station was turning against me. The manager was bypassing my defenses, coming up from below. The sludge formed shapes. Humanoid figures rose from the floor, dripping ooze. They had no faces, just smooth black surfaces. They stepped toward the counter, moving with a synchronized, jerky rhythm. I grabbed the silver whistle. Arrival. I blew it. The sound wasn't a whistle. It was a shockwave. It didn't call a train this time. It called the anchor. The floor shook violently. The organic machine in the basement roared. The vibration traveled up through my boots, through my spine, and out into the room. The black sludge figures destabilized, vibrating apart into droplets. They screamed as they lost their form, splashing back down into puddles of inert goo. I stood firm, the whistle still at my lips. "This is my station," I yelled. "My rules." The puddle of sludge in the center of the room began to boil. It swirled, rising higher and higher, forming a column of black liquid. It solidified, taking on color and texture. The manager stepped out of the pool. He was immaculate in his white suit, his face a perfect mask of handsome indifference. He looked around the shop, eyeing the boarded windows, the clean counter, the gray coat I wore. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Caleb," he sighed, brushing a speck of non-existent dust from his lapel. "You have made a mess. Do you have any idea how hard it is to find good help these days? Arthur lasted 3 years before he broke. You broke the contract in one night." "I didn't break the contract," I said, meeting his gaze. His eyes were voids, swirling with galaxies, but I didn't look away. "I fulfilled it. You wanted a soul to keep the seal active. You have one." The manager smiled, and the skin of his face stretched too tight. "But a willing soul is so much less flavorful. The fear, Caleb. We need the fear. It creates the texture." He took a step toward the counter. The air froze. My breath hung in clouds. "Give me the whistle," he said softly, "and I will let you walk out into the desert. You won't survive long, but you will die free." "No," I said. The manager's face cracked. A fissure opened across his cheek, revealing a blinding white light underneath. "Then you will be eaten." He lunged. His arms stretched across the room, his hand turning into a spear of bone. I didn't dodge. I slammed my hand down on the binder. "Rule 100. I screamed, processed as fuel. I grabbed the heavy iron stamp I had found in the basement, a stamp used for validating tickets. I brought it down on the manager's extended arm. Clunk. The sound was like a gavel striking a coffin. The manager stopped. He looked at his arm. Where the stamp had hit, the white suit and the pale skin were turning gray. The gray of ash. The gray of stone. "What?" he whispered, the galaxies in his eyes flickering. "The station eats everything," I said, my voice resonating with the power of the basement machine. "Even the management." The gray spread rapidly. It moved up his arm, across his shoulder, to his neck. He tried to pull back, but he was anchored to the counter. "You can't," he gasped, his voice losing its musical quality, becoming the grinding of rocks. "I am the warden." "Not anymore," I said. The gray covered his face. His mouth opened in a silent scream, then petrified. In seconds, the manager was gone. In his place stood a statue of ash and bone, frozen in a pose of aggression. The statue crumbled. It collapsed into a pile of gray dust on the linoleum floor. The wind outside stopped. The scratching ceased. The station was silent. I stood there for a long time, my chest heaving. I looked at the pile of dust. I looked at the binder. I felt a change. It started in my fingertips, a cold numbness spreading up my arms. I looked at my hands. The skin was pale, almost translucent. The veins underneath were black. I walked to the bathroom mirror, the one I had been forbidden to look at. I wiped the dust from the glass and stared at my reflection. My eyes were different. The irises were gone. They were just deep, dark pools. And when I smiled, it wasn't a human smile. It was the smile of something that had seen the other side and survived. I wasn't Caleb anymore. Not really. Caleb was the fuel that started the engine. I was the engine now. The digital clock on the wall flickered. 5:59 a.m. The sun began to rise. I walked to the front door and pulled the boards down. I tore off the copper tape. I unlocked the door. A car was pulling off the highway. A family sedan loaded with luggage. A vacation. They looked tired, dusty, and normal. They pulled up to pump 2. The dad got out, stretching his back. He looked at the station, seeing the cracked sign, the dusty windows. He didn't see the claw marks. He didn't see the pile of ash on the floor. He walked to the door. Bing bong! He stepped inside. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Do you have any coffee? We've been driving all night." I looked at him. I could see the pulse in his neck. I could smell the fear he was suppressing. The natural fear of being in the middle of nowhere. It smelled delicious, like ozone and vanilla. I smiled. "Fresh pot is brewing," I said. My voice was smooth, cultured, like a radio host. I walked to the coffee machine. As I poured the cup, I glanced at the counter. The binder was there, the black binder. I placed the coffee on the counter. "That'll be $2, I said. He handed me a crisp $5 bill. I opened the register. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of gray dust and bone fragments. I dropped the bill in. It disintegrated into ash instantly. I handed him his change. 3 coins. But they weren't quarters. They were heavy, gold tokens stamped with the profile of a creature with horns. "Here's your change," I said. "And, sir?" "Yeah?" he asked, grabbing the coffee. "Be careful on the road," I said, my eyes catching the light, flashing that deep, impossible black. "And if you see a bus with no destination, don't stop." He laughed nervously. "Right. Thanks." He walked out. I watched him drive away, disappearing into the heat haze. I looked down at the binder. I picked up the pen. I turned to a fresh page. Rule 101. The warden must feed. I looked out at the vast, empty desert. The sun was bright, but I could still see them. The shadows. The faceless man standing by a cactus. The static man flickering near the road sign. They weren't attacking. They were watching. They were waiting for orders. I tapped the silver whistle in my pocket. "Back to work," I whispered. I picked up the remote for the open sign and clicked it. The neon buzzed to life, humming that familiar electric drone. I am Caleb. I am the manager. I am the station. And I have an eternity of night shifts ahead of me. Come on in. We're open.